Coming up next here on the Metal Command podcast, I review the new Halo Effect album called March of the Unheard. I talk about my favorite album of the year for 2024, plus the other albums I really enjoyed from this past year. I talk about why I believe Kerry King when he says Slayer will never tour again, and I go more in depth on the comeback for Nevermore in 2025 and why I believe that is going to be a great thing. Plus, I talk about some of the statements that Van Williams and Jeff Loomis made, and of course, the statements that original bass player and former member Jim Shepard made about the band making their comeback. All of that next here on the Metal Command podcast.
You are listening to the Metal Command podcast.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Metal Command podcast. Tony here with you. Really excited to be here with everybody today here on January 13th, Monday, January 13th, actually. And I know it's been a long time since I recorded an episode. Unfortunately, I did have a death in the family over the holiday week, and that has kind of set things back and delayed things for me. But I'm back, and I'm excited to be back here. And don't forget, if you want to support the show, by all means, hit the subscribe button here on YouTube. Hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post any content here. And if you are following me on any other form of social media, by all means, give me a like and a follow there. Have a lot to get to. Really excited today to talk about my albums of the year for 2024. Now, if you follow me on social media and you follow the Facebook page, I did post about all of those albums over the last few days. But I want to throw a congratulations out to Flotsam and Jetsam. Flotsam and Jetsam, of course, just an outstanding album. Probably, in my opinion, the best record they have ever done. These last three records, in my opinion, by far the best material that they have ever recorded. And I got to be honest, when I go and do these like this album of the year list, what ends up happening is I get probably 500 submissions a year. I've talked about this in other podcasts. I've talked about it on this podcast. I get tons of electronic press kits from bands sent to me by publicists and record labels, and just a lot of record labels out there. I mean, I'm getting inundated with bands every single day, and I probably had I had a chance to listen to about 200 albums this year, and there are 30 that really hit the mark with me. I'm going to flash that list up here. I want everybody to see the list of my top 30 albums of the year. Check this out. This is the list, and in all honesty, these albums were outstanding for me. You know, I'm always going to get, those people that are going to say something along the lines of, oh my God, why not this band? Or why not this album? And to be honest, the cool thing about heavy metal, everybody's list is different. I was going through a lot of the favorite albums of the year lists from so many other media outlets, from some of the bigger media outlets. My list is literally completely different than probably anybody's that I've seen. And, metal is such a diverse genre, and there's so many subgenres, and there's so many bands. They don't resonate with everybody. They're, usually if there's a band I'm not into, I usually don't talk about them. But anyway, Flotsam and Jetsam, I got to be honest with you folks, looking at this list right now, it is my favorite album of the year. It was just such a perfect record for me, in my opinion. And then you go to Rage with After Lifelines. That actually was the album of the year up until the Flotsam album came out. Two CDs of basically two albums worth of music that they put out. But all of these albums really deserved to be here. If you're on this list, in my opinion, you put out an exceptional record. I mean, you got Sebastian Bach on there, Lords of Black, of course, a newer band on the scene, I think did really well. I'm just going to kind of go and give you some highlights on the list. Scanner, Again, they are a band that's never even cracked I think they cracked the top 10, but they've never been in the top 5 ever. Saxon, of course, always in the top 10 anytime they put out a record. I think Terra Maze, of course, on there. Very, very good prog band from Australia. Judas Priest. I think Invincible Shield was an amazing record. Firewind, of course, and Axis. I mean, that rounded out the top 10. Blaze Bailey. His solo stuff, again, is awesome. I liked the Kerry King album a lot more than I thought I would. Accept and Bruce Dickinson. Accept put out a great, solid effort. Bruce's album actually ended up getting a lot of flack from a lot of people. I'm kind of like in the middle of all that. I don't think it's his best album, but I definitely don't think it's bad. Voodoo Circle, Metal Light is a newer band on the scene that made the list. Warlord with their comeback album, outstanding. I debated putting Empires of Eden on this list because I sang one song on the album, but I decided, you know what? If I wasn't on the album, I'd review it. So I basically reviewed it. It made the top 20. Musically, it's outstanding. Aska, again, putting out an album, Night Strike. Definitely a great record. George Call really making kind of a comeback after, he left Clovenhoof with that record. And then rounding up the top 20, you have the Gems. These ladies they are amazing. They are definitely amazing. So some different bands in here than I normally would have. Dimitri, that's a band from the Czech Republic. They're an interesting band. There's an interview with them here on the podcast. He had Astronomica, which is Wade Black's new band. Deep Purple put out a really good album. David Reese, former singer from Accept, great record he put out. You got the Category 7 on there, Sirius Black, Satan, Clovenhoof, Plan 9, which is an album Ian Lukazen put out, and then, of course, the Nightwish album. So that's the list. Of course, you can go read down this list as well if you want to. I will put it in the show notes here on YouTube, but if you're on Facebook, obviously you can go back a few posts and see that list. So I got to be honest with you, as far as where I thought this year ended up, I think this year was a little bit weaker than the last couple years. There were more records sent to me, and I liked about the same amount of albums. So, it's one of those things where, some years are better than others. I think last year was great. But 2024 was an interesting year. Now, 2025 is starting out great. You got the Halo Effect album, which I'm going to review here in a minute. You have the new Gravedigger that's coming out, and the new Brainstorm album, which called Plague of Rats, which is a really, really great record. I'll review that here down the road as well. Trying to get Andy Frank on my show yet again. So this was a great list of bands. I think the Flotsam and Jetsam album, the last two before this, I think those albums, they were top 5 albums for me as well. So I think I Am the Weapon would hold its own against any year, or any year of, as long as I've been doing the show. It would hold up in any list. It would be up minimum the top 5, but it is definitely my favorite of the year. I talked about that briefly, earlier, probably back in the fall, but it's album of the year. So I want to send a huge shout out to Flotsam and Jetsam. I want to send a specific shout out to drummer Ken Mary, and of course guitarist Michael Gilbert, because they did come on the program this year, and the interviews were fantastic. They really were. So props to those guys. And I think 2025 is going to be great. You have a lot of great stuff. I'm really, of course, looking forward to the new Halloween album that will be, coming out, probably sometime in the first half this year, maybe early summer, maybe late summer, who knows? No release date has been set, but it's probably going to come out most likely around that time period. Is around the time they talked about. I saw a press release, something where it said maybe the first half of the year. We'll see. Overall, though, really excited, and this was a really, really good year. So let's move on to the next segment. Let's talk about the halo effect and why this album is as good as it is. So essentially, the halo effect is a band with a bunch of former members of In Flames. All of these guys in this band, I believe, were In Flames at one time. But I waited to review this because in the promo that they send out, the electronic press kit that they send out, the bonus tracks were not on that. So a lot of times they will send out the electronic press kit and they will send out the album, and a lot of labels will give you the bonus tracks. Like, for example, I talked about my list from last year of my favorite albums. Well, the promo had the bonus tracks for the new Judas Priest. They were in the promo. So this album didn't have the bonus tracks, though. So I wanted to wait until I actually received a hard copy of it. That way I can review it with the bonus tracks. And I got to be honest with you, this album is much better with the 3 bonus tracks that are on it. So you could see here, you have a list of the bonus tracks here. So let's talk about this record. And I liked the debut album by the Halo Effect. This album, first of all, if you like the debut, you're going to like this one about 10 times more. It's again, these guys were all in Flames at some point. The singer in this band was with In Flames in the very, very early days, from what I understand. But you have a lot of former In Flames members here. Jesper Stromblad, many of you might remember him as being one of the main guys in the band In Flames. But if you're looking for a band that has a similar sound to what In Flames used to sound like, and the era of the band that I'm specifically talking about is Horacle, Colony, and the Clayman. Those 3 records, like if you love those 3 In Flames albums, and for most people, I believe that those are, most people, when you talk about In Flames, they list those 3 records. The Jester Race is one that people love a lot. But the 3 albums I named are my favorites. And if you're looking for that kind of sound, that's exactly what this album sounds like. It is very, very good. Now, there is a little bit of variety in this. You have some different elements they throw into the music here and there. None of that stuff is all throughout the album. There's some electronic sounds here and there. There is a little bit as far as clean vocals, not a lot, but some of the tracks do have that. But for the most part, if you like Colony by In Flames, or you like the album Horacle, or if you like the album The Clayman, you want to check this band out. This band is very good. They basically take that sound and just really, really make that sound so much better. And I got to be honest, I was really excited for the fact that these guys ended up all getting together. I think Jesper Stromblad is really a phenomenal, great guitar player. He had a little bit of a hand in the first Hammerfall album. I know they listed him as a drummer, but from what I understand, he didn't really play drums on it. But he did get some credits on there for like lyrics and some other stuff. But when you look at guys that used to be in Flames, and you look at the lineup and guys that had played in that band, In Flames is such an important band, especially in the resurgence of the metal scene, back in the mid 90s, late 90s. Like I had talked to Fredrik Nordstrom about that, about a lot of those Swedish bands that were really making their mark back on Nuclear Blast. So this is, of course, available on Nuclear Blast. It's an outstanding record. It really is. Some of the melodies. Now, I got to be honest, and I know some people are going to yell blasphemy when I say this, but in many ways, I like the melodies and the songs better than In Flames in their prime, like with the Clayman and with Colony and Horacle. I actually think that they took that sound and kind of expanded on it a little bit. And like I said, you have a little bit as far as clean vocals go. You got some, different kinds of sounds on some of these songs. Nothing drastically crazy, but, just enough to make it a little bit different. But it's a very, very good, well-written record. I mean, all of these songs, none of these songs are crazy long. Like, they're not like 10, 12 minutes long. And they're basically straight to the point, but the melodies and the songwriting on it is just amazing. Now, I had talked about 2025 starting out, like really starting out with a bang. I talked about the Gravedigger album coming out on the 17th of January. Today's the January 13th. This album came out this past Friday. It came out January 10th. If you like melodic death metal, you cannot go wrong with this album. Seriously, it is really that good. If I'm going to give it a rating, I hate to do this. Well, actually, I love to do this. This album gets a 10 out of 10. Just like the Gravedigger album, Bone Collector, 10 out of 10. I think 2025 with this record and a couple other records that I've heard so far, it's off to a great start. So, props to the Halo Effect. I'm just blown away about how good the record was. I was expecting it to be good, but I did not think it would be this good. So essentially, that's where I'm at with it. Just an outstanding record. It really does deserve the props that it has been getting. Coming up next, after break, I'm going to talk about the Nevermore situation a little more in depth. And of course, I'm going to talk about why I believe Kerry King when he says Slayer will never tour ever again. All of that coming up next here on the Metal Command Show after this. Hey everybody, Tony here from the Metal Command Podcast. Again, I appreciate your support. Since 1998, I have hosted this show in one form or another, starting off in radio and now in the podcast format. Again, thanks for watching, and if you like what you see and hear on this show, by all means, please hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video, and if you see this program on any other form of social media, please give me a follow there. Again, I always appreciate your support. And welcome back to the Metal Command Podcast. Now let's talk about Nevermore. So I came out in the beginning of the year on New Year's Day. I talked about, the surprise that Nevermore was making a comeback, and they're going to come back with a different singer and a different bass player. And Jeff Loomis had pretty much announced afterwards the basis of why they are coming back. Same thing with Van Williams. Those two guys are bringing the band back. Obviously, Warrell Dane is no longer with us, and Jim Shepard, the original bass player in the band, is not coming back with the band as well. So after that whole thing was announced, of course, there was something that came out. Jim Shepard's wife, of all people, I thought that was a little bit odd, put out a statement basically saying Jim thought it was disrespectful, and thought it was disrespectful that the band was coming back. And there was really nothing, like, he didn't really elaborate on anything in regards to that, to which Jeff Loomis and Van Williams put up statements kind of detailing some things that had happened, not really giving explicit details, but basically saying that when the band broke up in 2011, there was a lot of tension between, Van and Jeff versus, Warrell and Jim Shepard. I mean, that's kind of what it insinuated based on the statements that Van Williams and Jeff Loomis had made. So then Jim came out and elaborated that he was kind of disappointed that they didn't contact him about it, and said he wishes them the best. Not so sure he really truly means that, but nevertheless, let's talk about it really quick. So, in the statements from Jeff Loomis and Van Williams, they talk about tensions. They kind of went into a little bit of detail saying there was a lot of bad things that had happened. There was a lot of bad blood going on between, Warrell and Jim versus Jeff and Van. I mean, that's kind of how I read it. And to be honest with you, I remember when Nevermore broke up, I thought it was a little bit odd that it happened the way that it did. Now, obviously, we are never going to know what truly happens behind the scenes. I could tell you that there are bands that I know personally that I've witnessed situations, and when they put the press release out about why somebody isn't in that band anymore, typically you're getting kind of more of a cookie cutter statement. But folks, none of us, unless you're there, none of us know the real story or what really happened. So obviously Van Williams is retired. Basically his statement, he was talking about how he, lives in Alaska now, and his wife is a wildlife photographer, which, by the way, I think is really cool. And he's content with that and wishes those guys the best. Now, his disrespectful comment, what did he mean by that? Was he upset they didn't ask him? Was he upset they didn't contact him? And it could be a little bit of all of that. Maybe he's upset that, the band is coming back and would rather let it rest. And I get that. I understand if he has those kinds of reservations and he's not happy about this, especially if you've had, some conflict in the past with the guys that are bringing the band back. I can understand why he would feel the way that he does. But it's very clear, saying he wishes them well, that he's kind of like, okay, I can't stop it. I'm just going to wish him well and leave it at that. Now, I've encountered Jim Shepard in the past. I remember meeting him when the Dreaming Neon Black tour was happening and they came to Cleveland. Super nice guy. Worrell was super nice. Jeff was kind of quiet, but he was super nice. And I met Van, but I didn't really hang out with him. And I did an interview with Worrell, Jim, and Jeff in the second floor of the club that they were actually playing in. It was Peabody's Down Under in the Flats in Cleveland. If you're from Cleveland, you'll understand exactly what I am talking about. So, here's the thing with the Nevermore thing. You know what's interesting? When they announced that Nevermore was going to make a comeback, usually when you don't have the original singer, especially a guy like Worrell Dane, who was loved by a lot of metal fans, usually you get a lot of pushback. You see a lot of people, a majority of people are like, no, don't bring it back, or it's going to suck because Worrell's not there, or the singer's not there, or whatever the case may be. You didn't see as much of that. In fact, I didn't see a lot of it, actually. I mean, there were comments made like that, but I was expecting a lot more of that. And at least on my page, like on social media where I post a lot of this stuff, I saw very little of that. Now you got to ask yourself, why would that be? Why would you not see as much pushback with Nevermore coming back without Worrell Dane, obviously? And I think a big reason for that is I had to go back and think about this. Jeff Loomis and his guitar playing was just as important to people, if not even in some cases more important, than Worrell Dane's vocals. Meaning that Jeff was as much of an attraction for people to listen to the band as Worrell's vocals were. And if you were a guitar player, Jeff Loomis was probably the biggest reason you listened to the band to begin with. Now, Worrell Dane had a very unique vocal delivery. He was a very different sounding vocalist, and obviously after the band had initially broken up, he went off and did another Sanctuary album and then passed away, sadly and unfortunately, before his next solo album could actually be completed. And I have nothing but love and respect for the guy. But at the same time, I have no problem with them coming back, because when I was thinking about it and I was listening to a lot of the Nevermore material and all of the albums that they created, I realized that Jeff was a big part of why I liked that band to begin with. Now, it's interesting, him and Van Williams mentioned a lot of tension going on, right before the band broke up. Tension had been building. There was some conflict. to me, one of the weaker albums they put out was the Obsidian Conspiracy. That was the last album they released. And it makes a lot of sense because I remember listening to The Godless Endeavor thinking, man, this is one of the greatest albums I've ever heard. And then the Obsidian Conspiracy comes out. And, it was pretty solid, but it definitely was not as good as the previous, 3 albums they had done. It's just a little bit of a weaker record. It's still good. I'm not saying the album is bad because it's definitely not. But, by Nevermore standards, it wasn't as good as the 2 or 3 albums previous to that. I didn't think it was as good as Dead Heart in a Dead World, for example. So that's essentially where I'm at when in regards to Nevermore making a comeback and doing what they're going to do. They're going to go out with a new singer and a new bass player. Now, they do have auditions. Let me touch on this a little bit. One of the things I think is really cool about Nevermore holding auditions, they aren't just going out and getting some name singer and recycling some guy that's been in 20 other bands in the heavy metal scene. They're actually going out and looking for vocalists that will fit what they have going on. It could be a guy that's known, or it could be somebody that is completely unknown. But the bottom line is they're not just going out and picking somebody. They're going to go out and listen to people's auditions and demos. And all the information is on Jeff Loomis's Facebook page. If you want to audition and send an audition video into the band, I like the fact they are doing that. And they are going to be taking their time listening to these folks. And whoever they like, they're probably going to take their time and get to know those people a little bit before they embark on a tour or even making a record. And I think that's a very smart thing to do, because something like that, you got to find somebody that you're going to vibe with on a personal level, not just the musical, not just the musical level, but the personal level as well, because you want to avoid the tensions or whatever issues you had right before the band broke up. And I think that's extremely important. And I think it's very smart of those guys to do it that way. So, Nothing But Love. I am really excited for this next chapter of Nevermore. And the other thing is, people, one of the things that was thrown out there too is that it's a money grab. First of all, Nevermore was never making millions of dollars to begin with. And the other thing is, Jeff Loomis was such an integral part of that band's sound. It makes more sense to just go back out under that band name, since he was pretty much, aside from Warrell Dane, the biggest part of that band's sound as far as, his guitar playing is concerned and the songwriting is concerned. Just go back out and make it the next chapter of Nevermore. That would be the smart thing, especially nowadays where marketing is really difficult and name recognition is definitely needed when it comes to marketing a band. So it just makes sense. I'm happy that they are back. I am, reading the words that Jeff Loomis and Van Williams put up on Facebook just makes me even more excited for this band to make a comeback. Really, really excited for it. So that's where I stand on the Nevermore thing. I'm really excited for them to come back. And I'm glad Jeff Loomis is going to be back at his best, doing what he does best, writing songs for that band. It feels like it was yesterday when they broke up, but it's been well over a decade since they have put a record out. So I'm looking forward to them making their comeback. Now let's move on to the last topic. Slayer. Now, why am I bringing up Slayer? Well, let me read this quote from Kerry King in regards to Slayer and to whether they will ever tour again. Here's the quote right here. Kerry King says, "We are never going to tour again. We're never going to make a record again. Mark my word, we're never going to make a record again. We're never going to tour again because that was the last thing. We said back in 2018, this is our final tour. It took 5 years for us to come and say, hey, there's a couple of shows, 5-year anniversary." That is from a quote from Metal Ruse. It's a really good podcast from Australia where Kerry did an interview with them. Okay, so I would say 95% of the time, I never believe a band when they say this will be our last tour. Come on, folks, we've all been down this road before. How many times did Kiss say this is their last tour? How many farewell tours did Ozzy Osbourne do? How many farewell tours did Motley Crue do? I mean, I can go on and on about all these bands that say it's going to be our last tour. We're never going to play again. This is it. And then they come right back out a year later, start playing shows again. With Slayer, I do not believe that will be the case. Let me give you a few reasons and a few factors as to why, and why I think Slayer is a little bit different when it comes to something like this. First of all, let's talk about Tom Araya. A big part of the reason that band retired, Tom Araya had talked about, hey, that he didn't want to, I think he had some kind of neck injury, but he was interested in retiring. And I think Kerry King even said something about that, where he was upset that Slayer quit and basically quit sooner than he thought they should have. The guy just wants to retire, doesn't want to do it all the time. I get it. And I think that's a lot different than, Motley Crue and some of these other bands going up there saying, hey, we're done. This is because the guy's just worn out, just doesn't want to do it. Now, I will say, for those of you that were upset or calling them out, hey, they said they'd never play again, but they're playing festivals. They actually said right after they did their last tour, full-length tour, that is, that they would play festivals. They would consider it. And it took 5 years for that to happen. And I truly believe Slayer now is going to be relegated to a band that just plays big festivals every now and then, and that's it. Could they come back if Tom Araya wants to go on and do like a tour of like 80 shows? Maybe. But I don't think that's going to happen. And I think a big reason as to why is that he just doesn't want to do it anymore. I mean, we've seen interviews where this has been talked about. We talked about his neck hurting him from too much headbanging on stage. So I think that's probably the biggest factor as to why they will never tour again. And then Kerry King's doing really well with his solo project. He's kind of full on committed to his solo project. He's put a lot into it. That album was awesome. Obviously, in my top albums of the year list. Pretty high up in that list, by the way. And I didn't expect that. But it's one of the best things I've ever heard him do. And you got a new lineup of people that you get to play in a band with. And there's like, that magic is basically back with his solo band. So his solo band is doing pretty well. All his energy is going into that. I think at this point, the Slayer thing is basically going to be the occasional nostalgia act playing Wacken or some of these other festivals. And that's it. And look, it works out, for Tom Araya, for example, because, he doesn't have to do a full tour, but, maybe doing 2, 3, or maybe 4 shows a year, if that's not that big of a deal. You go out for a weekend, you play a big festival, you get paid, people get to hear the music again. It helps the festival sell tickets because you can't just go and see Slayer every night like you used to be able to. So it works out for the best for everybody in that band. That way Gary Holt can still concentrate on Exodus. I just think things are so different now that I just don't see them going out and touring. I'd be shocked if they went out and said, hey, we're going to play 100 shows or 80 shows. I would be shocked if that happened. But I do not think that is going to happen, folks. Just not going to happen. So that's all I have for you, folks. That's where I'm at. Anyhow, thanks for watching. Again, took a while for a new episode, but I plan on making this more of a regular thing. The holiday season was a pretty rough one. So thanks for those of you that wrote to me asking me where I'm at, checking on me to make sure I'm okay. Everything's fine. Just some crazy stuff happened during the holiday week. And I'm back. I'm going to start doing interviews again. I have a lot of interviews lined up for some great bands coming on the show. And pretty much that's it. So with that said, folks, thanks for watching. Stay metal. Thank you for watching and listening to the Metal Command podcast. If you like what you see and hear on this show, by all means, subscribe to the channel. Hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video. And of course, if you are following me on any other form of social media, by all means, give me a like and a follow there. Thanks for watching. Stay metal.